My name is Ben Homan. I'm the props director here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and today we're going to talk a little about texture. Texture is awesome because it creates richness and depth, and it gives us highlight and shadow. So we use a lot of texture on our props to add that depth as a thing. So as an example, this is just a normal piece of fabric, has very little interest to it. We can do texture in a lot of ways. Some of them are just visual. So we have this, which is just a printed pattern, but still a flat fabric. Here we have a fabric that has a little bit of depth to it, but also has two types of weave to it. So we have a shiny and a matte. And then here's one which is actually tactile, and you can feel the textures on it. So the two main kinds are visual and then physical or tactile, things you can actually touch and feel the texture of, which is what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to show you a couple of simple textures that you can add to your props or to your scenery or to your costumes for that matter to give them more depth and richness. So what we've done is I have I'm doing some plywood as sample boards for this, and I have mixed up some glue. This is just regular white glue, and we've mixed it about 50-50 with some water so that it's kind of like the consistency of like heavy cream. So you want to stir it up really well to make sure that you don't have it separated, but it wants to have a little bit of thickness to it. I'm just using some cheap paint brushes today. So the first one is just tissue paper. We use this a lot on things. So it's just regular tissue paper you would use to wrap a gift. And what we do is you want to wet down your surface with some glue. Just get a good layer of glue on there. And then you want to take your tissue paper and you want to just crumple it up. Make a good tight little ball, and then you want to pull it out again. And this is what we call tissue paper light texture. So once it's smoothed out, you want to put it on your board or whatever your surface is. And this should be able to cover the whole thing because it's about 12 inches square. And you kind of want to just sort of mush it down with your hands. You're going to get a little bit of glue on your hands, but that's okay. Props is fun because you get to be messy. And then you want to take some more glue and just put a layer over the top. And it can extend past the edges. If you're doing like a prop or a trunk, you may want to be a little more careful about the edges and stuff. But you basically just want to get a layer of glue on there to help get the tissue paper to stick to your substrate, your surface that you're attaching to. And then we're going to let it dry. And in a minute, I've actually made some samples beforehand that will show you how that looks when it's all finished. Our second version of texture is tissue paper heavy. Same sort of situation. You're basically sticking down some glue on your surface, taking another piece of tissue paper, and it's basically the same exact process. So you're going to take it, scrunch it up, but this time, when you open it up, you're going to keep it more wrinkly, and so we're going to use this whole sheet on half of this board. We're going to kind of stick it down with a lot more thickness to it, and again, sort of squish it down, and then as you glue, you want to sort of glue by pushing down first, and then once it starts to stick a little bit, then you can brush side to side, because you don't want to rip the tissue paper. When it's wet, it'll get really fragile, so you don't want to rip it. But you can tell how it's a much thicker texture to it, which will be useful later. And again, we'll show you a finished sample here in just a little bit. Okay, so that's 1 and 2, light tissue paper and heavy tissue paper. The third is one of my favorites, which is lace. So we found some old lace curtains. You could buy brand new lace if you want to. This is just a piece of a curtain from a show probably about 10 years ago. And again, white glue is your friend. So a layer of white glue on your surface. It's going to feel a little repetitive here. And then you want to lay your lace down. And this can just go on flat. No need to put texture in here because the texture is going to come from the pattern of the lace. And again, to hold it down, you're going to do a layer of glue over the top. And if it gets wrinkly, you could sort of pull the edges or whatever to get those wrinkles out. And just get it nice and glued down. And again, we'll sort of jump ahead here because I have samples to show you how that works. The fourth one, let me grab something here. The fourth one is textured wallpaper. So this comes in all kinds of patterns. You can buy it at any kind of big box store. You could buy it online. You just search for textured wallpaper. So this one kind of has a bamboo pattern to it. This one here is actually a nice little octagon design. So you can buy this in tons and tons of different patterns. And you put it on like wallpaper. So it's basically, again, putting glue on. We're going to sort of jump ahead and skip to actually attaching this, but putting glue on the board, putting the paper down, squeezing it out really well so the glue sticks. You don't need to put a coat of glue on the top of this one, just to make sure the edges are down really, really well. And again, you have to let everything dry until it's completely dry. Okay, so those are our first 4 samples. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you kind of how they end up. So tissue paper light ends up looking kind of like this. And it's probably hard to see a little bit on the camera. But once we paint them, which we'll do in another segment, you'll kind of see how it works out. So tissue paper light, here's tissue paper heavy, once it's dried all the way. And you can see how it's much thicker. You can feel, probably hear, the texture on that. Here is our lace sample, all glued down in tight. And this is really going to come alive when we get to the painting segment, which will happen in a different section here. And then this is the wallpaper sample. I used the octagon one for this. So, and again, you can apply this to sort of any substrate, any surface you want to add texture to, okay? Another thing we do a lot is we spray through materials. So this is that same red fabric I was showing you earlier, just a plain cotton fabric, fairly inexpensive at a big box store. And we took an old piece of lace and we laid it on top of the fabric, and then we just sprayed gold spray paint through the lace. This is the same piece of fabric. So you can see how much more depth and richness that gives you. You could do a dark maroon on the red to give it that kind of, so you can choose your colors. And that's one way to do it. Another way is to find any other kind of stencil type material. So this is a piece of sheet metal we got at the local hardware store, which we used for something else, but we had it in stock. So I just spray painted silver through it, again, onto another piece of that red fabric, and it gives you some more texture. So it's all about sort of showing the detail and the depth that you can add to things. You gotta be a little careful you don't do too much detail and depth on every single thing you're working on. Otherwise, the whole stage will get really muddy and kind of hard to look at, okay? One other thing we do a lot of is we do sawdust. So we save all of our sawdust out of our saw, big chunky stuff out of our planer, and we just have it in buckets. And so here's some sawdust in a container. And then we just take some paint, whatever color you want your base to be on your object, and you pour the paint into your sawdust, and then you're going to stir it up. And you want it to be kind of like really thick paste. If you want it to be more spreadable, you can add more paint. But you just want a good sort of chunky, almost like oatmeal consistency. The color, of course, will depend on what base you put on. And then you'll brush this onto whatever surface you're working with. So again, to speed up on time, I've done a sample here. This is kind of 2 samples in one. So this half is what I would call light sawdust. And so we brushed the sawdust a lot so it wasn't clumpy. And then on the other side, we actually sort of took the brush and we sort of clumped, get enough paint on here, we sort of clumped the sawdust on and kind of pushed it down, more of a sort of a, less of a brushing technique. So you had lots and lots of texture to it. And then you can brush that out as much or as little as you want to, depending on how much texture you want. And part of this whole thing is sort of figuring out what visually are you trying to create? Is this tree bark? Is this, rough sawn lumber? Those kinds of things. And that will kind of help you figure out like what texture is best and how to kind of use it. One other thing we do a lot of, where's my mask? Here it is. This is a tragedy mask. I'm not sure I had the right one. It's plastic. And we bought it from a mask place, and it is covered with aluminum foil. It's gold aluminum foil, which we found they make for wrapping baked potatoes for food service. So if you search online, you can find just about any color of foil you would like. These are great because they come in like 8-inch by 8-inch sheets, so it's really easy to work with rather than like a big roll that you have to rip off. But we have green foil and pink foil and all kinds of foil. And so this, we actually used spray adhesive. You could use white glue probably as well. we spray adhesed the mask and just took the foil. And again, we did sort of the crumple technique where, this will be bad on the mic, I'm guessing, but we crumple it all up and then smooth it back out and then spray adhese the mask. And then as you put this down, you can sort of descend how much texture you want. You can leave it really wrinkly or smooth it out a whole lot to give you a different depth of texture on the mask. I once did a production of Peter Pan at another theater, and the entire box set was covered in sheets of aluminum foil in 12-inch squares. It looked really, really cool. So those are kind of some basic ways that we add texture. And you think, oh yeah, sure, you're saying that, but you don't actually do it at the festival. What we do, this book right here is from a production of The Tempest we did a number of years ago. And these are just giant chunks of foam. You can see the foam's kind of poking through here. And these are all covered with tissue paper and glue to give them kind of a worn leather book look. And we made about 150 of these books and made a giant book arch out of them. As far as like the sawdust texture, this pot-bellied stove here, move some of my display. This pot-bellied stove here was covered in sand and paint. Instead of sawdust, we use sand. There's all kinds of materials you can mix into paint. But it gives you sort of that metal texture to it. It has a real fine texture to it. This is actually plastic flower pots from a local box store. So really inexpensive. We built this whole thing for about $11. But the texture is what sells it on stage to make it look like it's cast iron. The whole thing weighs about 9 pounds. A real one would weigh about 150 pounds. And then as far as like the lace or things like that, this trunk is completely covered in lace. And some of it is 2 layers of lace, some of it's 1 layer of lace. But again, you can see how much sort of depth and texture this box has versus if it was just painted wood. So it adds a lot more richness to the surface. And yeah, so that's kind of some of the basic texture things that we do here at the festival to make things look cool and interesting. See you in the next session.